Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we have the honor of having Dr. Maxine Sherman on the podcast. So, Dr. Maxine Sherman is a professor of cognitive neuroscience and lecturer in computer science and AI at the University of Sussex. Her research focuses on human metacognition, exploring how we assess our own and others' beliefs and intentions using behavioral experiments, computational models, and neuroimaging techniques. Welcome to the show, Maxine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we have met before at a panel discussion a few months ago. Yeah, and I just wanted to ask how have you been and how's it been since the last time we spoke? I know you mentioned that you had quite a high key period of things lately, so
Yeah,
yeah.
no, it's been good, thank you. I'm teaching a new module
Mm,
this term, which is cognitive and computational psychology for computer science and AI students. So I'm writing that.
I
Um,
see. So have you started already or is it coming up?
yes, we're in week 4 at Sussex.
Mm,
Yeah, it's good. We're going
that's
to do
nice.
metacognition later in the term, so that'll be nice.
So you have two different modules that you teach in the term, is that right?
Yeah, so there's one in term 1 and one in term 2.
Yeah,
Different cohorts. Yeah,
I
it's good.
see. That's cool. That's cool. So I guess on that topic, I've been curious to know what your journey in academia was like and how you found your way into metacognitive research and in AI as well.
Sure. Um, so I started during my undergrad. I did maths
Hmm.
um, because I liked it, but I didn't really know where I could go with it. And so in my third year, I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I decided I wanted to be a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. So I came to Sussex because they had a conversion master's for they got BPS accreditation without having done psychology before. Started that, loved it, didn't like clinical as much. It wasn't for me. What I really found I loved was the cognitive.
Hmm.
And then I ended up staying. So then I did my PhD at Sussex with Ryota Kanai and Anil Seth. Ryota's left now. He's gone back to Japan, but Anil is still here. And there, the idea was we were going to be looking at um, effects of kind of top-down expectations on facets of consciousness. And so I was going to start with attention, but then my partner at the time, he suggested, well, still my partner, he suggested that I collect confidence ratings because he was doing unconscious knowledge and artificial grammar learning. So I thought, well, that sounds fun. And anyway, I just ended up getting. It was a series of really, really fortunate events, one after another, and I really liked it. I found it really interesting. I stuck with it, and then I continued on that route in my postdocs as well.
Hmm. And like I guess the math that you did in the undergrad was quite helpful, right, in the transition to maybe the more AI side and computational modeling as well.
Yeah, so I it was another just really good stroke of good fortune because I didn't know at the time when I was studying it how it could be used.
Hmm.
The place that I did my undergrad, they weren't they didn't really explain what the utility of some of the things we were learning was. But yeah, it's definitely really useful in the sense that I primarily just in terms of being able to read maths.
Hmm. That's so interesting. It's funny because the last person I had on the show, his name is Michael Matosis. He's a lecturer at UCL, a clinical lecturer, and he told me that he studied physics before becoming a psychiatrist, which is it's so fascinating to me how I guess people can come from different backgrounds and reach clinical work, or at least decide to study clinical work. And then even after that, after he stopped practicing, or rather, not that he stopped practicing, but he moved his attention to computational psychiatry, which is where his love for math and physics kind of merged into psychiatry, which is so
There's a lot
interesting.
of physicists in computational psychiatry, right? Because a lot of it is based on statistical mechanics and stuff. So they're so well set up.
Hmm.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's not very well known, to be honest, that
Mm.
psychology can be modeled in such a mathematical way, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's still relatively new, I
Hmm.
guess.
Hmm.
really start 2010 or something, where it
I was
started
too
getting
young
really
to remember
kind of
that.
exploding. Yeah, I guess that's a long time ago now. It doesn't feel like a
Hmm,
long time ago. Yeah.
cool. Okay, so I guess on metacognition, the simplest and easiest question to ask is what exactly are we referring to, right? So could you give a brief
Simple
definition of
question.
what metacognition is?
It's not a simple question. Um, what is metacognition? So broadly, um, the way I think about it is that it's where the object of your cognition, so the thing that you're cognizing about, is internal. So that might encapsulate thinking, reflecting on any states, any case in which you're. I mean, I think actually that broadly covers it. So, am I making the right kind of choices? Is my strategy working? Should I switch strategies? The most the one that's kind of the most amenable to study, and I think when lots of people say that they're doing cognitive psychology or neuroscience and they say they do metacognition, they're usually talking about the evaluation of confidence. So, did I make the right choice?
So this is kind of like our knowledge, let's say, of how well we're performing on a certain cognitive task, like a base level cognitive task, right?
Um, yeah, in some instances, I mean, I think that's why defining metacognition is actually quite a broad question because it should
Mm,
be much bigger than that. A lot of the field, I guess, myself included, hone in. So, am I performing well on a task in general is really interesting. This is a kind of, I mean, Steve Fleming calls it global confidence. So,
yeah.
some overall sense of self confidence and in how you're performing. So, for example, I'm a good driver, I'm a bad driver. And then often in experiments, you're also looking at confidence for particular choices. So was this one thing I did, was that a good decision or not? Uh,
Mm,
as in, did I get the correct answer?
mm. Okay, yeah. So I guess that's the more global, less specific to a certain cognitive ability and more of like just general performance on something. So yeah, I get that it's really hard to define metacognition, but maybe let's try and explore the various ways to define metacognition. Because the follow-up question that I've been thinking a lot about is what exactly is the content of metacognition, right? So you could be reflecting on, let's say, your memory, for example, how much knowledge you know of something, and you don't necessarily have to retrieve the actual memory itself, right? Something like knowing you can recite all the letters of the alphabet. Would you consider that metacognition?
Um, yes, I would.
Okay.
Um, the thing you are, so you definitely wouldn't. I can't imagine you would have to be able to recall everything to be able to estimate that. But there must be some way in which you're forming some idea of whether I think you said whether you can recite all the letters of the alphabet. Um, and so that you're reflecting on something, and it might be that you're I don't know simulating some of the letters or something, recalling a few and saying, yeah, this feels fluid, so
Hmm, okay.
I could probably carry on. But all of that is kind of internal, and then you're doing something on some sort of internal state. So yeah, I would absolutely call it metacognitive.
Hmm. What about something like perception? Like perception, like visual perception. Let's say if I'm looking at uh, something, would it be metacognition to self-criticize maybe if I'm looking at the right thing or yeah.
Yeah, so that's usually not what people do, but I think absolutely yes. So there, it's kind of you're reflecting on um, where you're placing your spatial attention, say
Mm,
featural attention. So am I concentrating on the right region of space to I don't know find my bottle of Diet Coke, or am I looking for the right thing when I'm searching for my bottle of Diet Coke?
mm,
Yes, it would also be. You could also have the object be the percept itself. So say if you need glasses and you're not wearing them, you could say, oh, I think that is the 23 bus, I think, but I'm not sure.
Hmm.
And then you can do some other form of, so that would be kind of metacognitive evaluation. You can also then determine that you need to change strategy. So I'm going to put my glasses on. Yeah, it's the 23 bus. I'm going to get on that one.
Okay. So is it fair to say that, well, the ones that I listed are not as well studied in the metacognitive field, or?
I'm going to think about this to make sure I don't make a mistake and just forget an entire field. Okay, so restricting to kind of cognitive neuroscience, cognitive psychology, I think that's fair, and I think it's probably because it's harder. So, and it's harder in a way. Visual perception, auditory perception as well. They're really nicely characterized. So you can build kind of simplified models of how these perceptual decisions are being made, and then that leads you to form theories about how the confidence estimate is coming about. I mean, attention is a very computational field, so in theory, you should be able to do it for attention too. And maybe there are other subdisciplines which do that. But as you get to other kinds of decisions, it just becomes really hard. So there's a lot of work on meta-memory, on confidence for memory.
Okay.
But those models are harder because understanding the kind of modeling the memory system is much harder than something like vision.
So the work that you do is focused more on task performance, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
primarily. I started going into self-efficacy or just kind of global confidence. But recently I've kind of started to shift away from it. I'm starting to think that perhaps there's a limit to where we can get to in terms of studying metacognition when you just focus on perception. Because in the lab, which is usually how things are done, you bring in a participant, you ask them to do some task. For example, you show them some moving dots, moving left or right. Say, were they moving left or right? How confident are you? Something like that. So, and then you take the confidence judgments and you hypothesize how they're going to change if you change some manipulation, or maybe you use them to test some model or something. But the problem is, I think the easiest way for the participant to do this task is to not self-reflect and not do metacognition, but just tell you how noisy the dot motion was, which is not
Right. So
so this is what I'm working on now.
as in, does that mean you're saying that it might be a confound, that the participant ends up not using metacognition, and therefore what you're measuring isn't metacognition anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it might feel like metacognition. So I guess you could also just frame it as a heuristic, and that could also be fine. And I think that's what happens if you're not wearing your glasses and you're trying to read something. How do you know you need to put on your glasses? Because it looks fuzzy. So you're using a different perceptual feature, which is the uncertainty, and you're saying the uncertainty is high. So
Right, that is so
rather
interesting.
than saying, oh, I've got low confidence, I mean, it might manifest as I have low confidence, but I think maybe I'm trying to check this now. It's actually really hard to say that two things are the same. It's really easy to show that they're different in an experiment, but showing they're the same is really hard. But this just seems like an easier way of getting perceptual confidence.
Right. Yeah, because so in my reading and my research on metacognition, I see the struggle with trying to pick apart certain things and find out what exactly we're trying to measure, right? Because there's so many correlates of things that come together. One of my questions that might pop up later on is about metacognitive sensitivity, and that kind of thing, and then trying to piece it apart from the actual um, perception of or at least the task itself. Yeah, and I thought it was a really nice way of um, measuring metacognition, at least when I read the papers that have been published so far. But yeah, now hearing you say that, it does make a lot of sense that it could be just a heuristic that we
Only in
use.
certain domains.
Hmm.
I think there are other ones where that wouldn't work. So, or at least not in a way that's easy to understand as a person. So, if you kind of move out of perception and you start to think, how is it that I decide what estimates whether I've done well in an exam? What is the uncertainty around that? I don't know. It's not intuitive like perceptual uncertainty
Hmm.
in the world, and well, it's not in the world, but it's easy to estimate. It's kind of a perceptual feature how blurry something is.
Hmm. So I guess when it gets more complex, yeah.
Yeah, when you start moving to high level cognition.
How is this being received in the field, though? I mean, have you spoken to anyone about it? What do they think?
No, so I've got one part of the study done, and so conference season starts summer, so we'll see.
Okay, I hope for the
Um,
best with that.
the people I've chatted to about it are not in metacognition, but they seem to think it makes sense. But
Hmm.
I'm curious to see. Um, yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to be received.
Yeah.
There's a kind of part 2 to the study I need to finish, but part 1 is done.
Okay, I will be keeping my eye on that. So I guess just to stay a bit on the content section for one last bit, um, would you consider awareness of cognitive states like emotion, for example? Would you consider that metacognition?
Um, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because for me, it's like it's when I hear of confidence, right, it's because there is sort of a right answer, or at least a correctness to what you are observing.
Hmm.
And that in some sense is like error monitoring, right?
Hmm.
But a cognitive state like emotion isn't exactly, there's no right or wrong emotion, let's say. There is just the emotion that you're feeling. And then, um, but we can be aware of that. We can know, okay, I'm feeling angry right now. Um, as
You
opposed
can
to,
know why, which is kind of even the next step in metacognition. So I'm angry, and I'm angry because.
hmm, yeah, okay, and you just went to the next part, which I always wanted to ask. Um, because yeah, as I was thinking about it, I also realized that we can report confidence, but that doesn't necessarily explain where that confidence comes from, right? We don't know why we felt confident or unconfident because sometimes confidence is a gut feeling, let's say. Yeah, so is there any work on how the brain derives this judgment? Um,
Which part? You mean
like the confidence, let's say, like where the confidence comes from.
so there's a lot on the confidence element. So a substantial portion of confidence um, is shared with the decision it was based on, which makes
Hmm,
sense. So,
yes.
for example, um, say you want to know about how confident someone is that they're feeling angry versus sad. So, a lot of the basis of that confidence will be on how much angry versus sad evidence you had. Um,
Hmm,
so, the more blatantly angry you feel, the more confident you are. So that makes sense. Um, Confidence is also incorporating information, kind of prior information, biases, things like that, prior knowledge, expectations. Um, it has a kind of complicated relationship with attention.
Hmm.
It's not entirely clear. And then I can't remember your original question, actually. What was your original?
I guess it was more of a question about how our confidence is computed in us, because we can derive a feeling of confidence and knowledge that we are confident, but not know where that comes from. It may not be explicit to us, why we feel confident. So I was just wondering if there's any research on how the brain gets there.
Yeah, so there's a lot, and I don't think there's a definitive answer, but you have different kind of camps. So one of them basically says that confidence is kind of estimated from the object of your confidence, so from the decision. So you're confident about something, so that's something.
Hmm.
Confidence is some sort of noisy transformation of that. Some people are in the camp that they're not necessarily conflicting, but they come from a different place. So kind of a Bayesian confidence view where confidence is the kind of probability that you got it right, given all sorts of sources of information.
Hmm.
I suppose those are the main ones. There are some other ideas where in perceptual confidence, what's going on is you can have some sort of your perceptual system estimates, for example, whether something is a square or a circle. And then when you estimate confidence, you're kind of looking at the stimulus independently, of your perceptual system. So this is a dual root account. Or the confidence, your kind of metacognitive system has additional access, separate access to the information. But broadly, it's not completely decided how people estimate confidence.
Let's dive into the
similar-ish. Yeah.
Let's dive into the Bayesian part, because I hear this term being thrown around quite a lot in computational psychology, let's say. The idea of Bayesian reasoning, Bayesian inference, Bayes theorem, whatever, that kind of thing. Yeah. What exactly is that?
So, at its core, if you have a Bayesian account of something, then it's going to have certain features. So one feature is that the decision is an inference. So you're not just taking a piece of information from the external world. You have to make some sort of kind of tested hypothesis, if you like. And the other one is that it's statistically optimal, usually. So in different sources of information are being combined in an optimal way, probabilistically, so that you're weighting everything by its reliability in this optimal way. So if you combine, for example, visual information and haptic information, touch, then those would be combined so that what you see carries more weight than what you feel, because our vision is more precise.
Right.
So it's this statistically optimal way of combining evidence.
So is it like
that's largely, so that's the kind of foundation of all the Bayesian models.
So is it like computing probabilities based off of how reliable certain sources of information are, that kind of thing?
Exactly. So say you want to say that your inferences, so you want to model confidence in a Bayesian way, then you might say something like, confidence is the probability that my decision was correct, given the information that I have. So given the decision I made, it was correct. So a Bayesian model might say something like, you're going to combine your decision evidence, so whatever it was that you based your decision and maybe some sort of global confidence estimate, perhaps. So you have a general overall belief that you do well or poorly at this task. And each of them have some sort of uncertainty about them or reliable. So for example, I know that I'm the world champion in this task because I won the gold medal. So that's going to be a really highly
Global
reliable source
confidence.
of
Yeah.
information. And it would dominate your confidence decision. Something like that.
Okay. So that gives us a useful way of understanding how we, I guess, get to our metacognitive judgment of our decisions.
Yeah, there are some really nice models of this kind of thing. So I think it was Rao. In 1999, there was this big paper that proposed that the visual system, or early visual system, could be explained in terms of predictive coding. And so one of the authors did a really nice paper recently looking at a kind of Bayesian model of confidence, but where the observer, the agent, the person, doesn't have perfect knowledge of the world, which is sometimes what can be assumed in some of these models. Okay, so you've got this imperfect knowledge that you're combining with expectations and stuff, and that this generates really nice human-like confidence reports. So you can extend these models in interesting ways as well, make them a bit more complicated.
I see. That's exciting work.
I liked that paper. It's good.
Okay, so let's move to something that I alluded to earlier, which is about metacognitive sensitivity. Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of metacognitive sensitivity is how well our metacognitive judgment reflects the actual performance on the task. So if, let's say, I did poorly and I have and I think that I did poorly, then I am metacognitively sensitive. And likewise for if I did well. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So it's like know that you know. Knowing that you know. Yeah.
And that is something that has been tested, right? That's something that's been measured in people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to dive into the methodology of that just a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, how is that done?
So the absolute simplest way you could do this, there are two. One is you check that when people make correct judgments, they're more confident than when they make incorrect judgments. That's going to be the simplest. You could also just do a correlation in a similar way. So is your confidence positively correlated with your accuracy? So that the more confident I am, the more I was correct. And at its core, the existing measures of metacognition are trying to capture this kind of pattern, but in a way that's going to be robust to all sorts of biases, because you can't really use those measures because if people are just generally very confident or generally perform very well, or they generally have a bias towards making one kind of report over and over again, things like correlations are going to get skewed. So instead, at the moment, the measure that many people use is something called meta-D. So this was introduced by Hak-Kwan Lau and Brian Maniscalco. And so in this measure, this is kind of a model-based measure. And I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. It's a bit dry.
It's fine.
I'll give a conceptual overview of it. So conceptually, the idea is how relative to a kind of perfect, optimal metacognitive agent, how much worse am I than that? Okay. So this is what the things would look like if my confidence was based on all the information my perceptual system has.
Hmm.
If there's any sort of loss or noise or forgetting or anything like that, it's going to be a bit worse. And how much worse it is the measure of metacognitive sensitivity.
And so that would be the meta D that you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so is that like the distance, um, like on average, like what kind of units are we referring to here?
So you would usually calculate something called M ratio. So then it's a ratio, how much, how close am I to optimal? So 1
Hmm.
means I am exactly the same as the optimal observer. Half
Okay.
means a meta D of 0.5 means I'm half as good.
Right. Okay.
When you don't do the ratio, it's in it's in signal detection theoretic units.
Hmm. The dry stuff. Yeah, I did come across signal detection theory and I tried to wrap my head around it. I think I'm gonna need a few more years. Yeah. Okay,
There's some really nice tutorials on it online.
hmm,
I found it. If you're interested, I can send it to you. It's amazing,
okay,
interactive
okay,
tutorial.
that'll be good. Yeah, and so you also have a paper on something called metacognitive threshold, which was really interesting to me. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Okay, this is also really dry and
It's
um,
fine.
I know I abandoned that one in the end. I can yes. So in this meta-D model, this way that you use to estimate metacognitive sensitivity, how good your confidence ratings are, you get this other measure out, which is which describes your confidence threshold. So, how much evidence do I need to say that going to be I'm going to be confident? I'm going to report confidence. And what the goal of the paper was to try and find a nice measure of confidence that's not just the person said 70 confident 70% of the time, because people fluctuate in how they use scales.
Yeah.
So the idea was to try and see whether we could get a measure of metacognition, confidence, that's not going to change according to how good people are or how metacognitively good people are, but just some sort of confidence bias. And so that's what we're trying to do there. It worked okay. You need a lot of data to get it
Hmm.
to be clean.
I'm guessing because there's not a lot of noise in the.
Yeah, but it kind
Hmm.
of you can do it. So it's using this meta D model that already exists.
Hmm.
It's just combining some of the parameters in a specific way, and in that sense, you can broadly get out this measure of how biased people's confidence ratings are.
Is there a reason it didn't get followed through?
Um, is there a reason? Um, Not really. I kind of I'm very pro preprints, so it's a preprint,
Hmm.
um, and I like the idea of you do a piece of work, you write it up, you share it for free online, and um, I mean sometimes having it in a journal is great, but also the
Not
works that if anyone
necessary.
wants to read it, it's there, and if anyone wants to give feedback, I'm very happy to hear it. I can revise it, but I guess I didn't continue with it.
Hmm. Okay. Um, yeah, so maybe let's talk a bit more abstractly since yeah, it can be a bit dry going to the technical details. Um, so let's just talk about metacognition as a practical function for humans to use, right?
Mhm.
Um, Tell me what you think about this. So I view metacognition as the mechanism to overcome bias. And I use bias very generally here because um, I think broadly speaking, you can characterize all mistakes as having some form of bias, in a sense that um, you are blindsided to a piece of information and therefore overweight a certain thing. So in that sense, having poor metacognition leads to unchecked bias, right? You're not aware of a certain mistake that you're making, and then as a result, the correction doesn't take place, right? You don't put your glasses on when you need to because you're not confident or something like that. Yeah,
Right.
does that make sense?
I think so. I think I lost you at the end. Um,
Or which part? Like,
about why having bias makes you, or rather, why being incorrect makes you biased.
oh, okay, maybe I'm speaking a bit imprecisely, but
No, no, it's okay.
I, yeah, I was trying to maybe simplify the concept of an error into being biased. So if you if you make an error on a task, right? You have poor performance. I would say that it's because you are misinformed. You're not in check with reality, let's say, and then because of that, I would say that you're biased in some way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to say is also, now I remember the answer to why I never finished that
Okay, that's
context.
good. Yeah.
So the thing is that sometimes I see what you're saying, and in some contexts, I would agree.
Mm.
But sometimes our decisions, so usually when we talk about whether a decision was like a correct or incorrect, we're talking about the external world. So what happens? But sometimes we make the best decision we can with the information that we have, because we don't have all of it. And so it's not there'll be cases where we're not biased. It's that we're responding well with what we have. So in vision, this is a problem in visual metacognition because you make the stimuli really hard to see. And if
Mm.
somebody says, no, it wasn't there, I'm very confident that it was there. We're going to say that they're wrong and their metacognition is poor, but maybe they just didn't see it. In which case, is that bad metacognition? I don't know. They're
Mm.
supposed to be reflecting on what came on their own internal states, right? And if their internal state, the information wasn't there for them to see, it was invisible to them, then that's good metacognition, right? Because for them, there was nothing. So, so kind of mapping to what you're saying, um, I think sometimes people can have appropriate metacognition, like their confidence is tracking whether they made a good choice or a bad choice. Okay, that's fine.
Mm.
And the choice, it turned out, didn't get the person where they wanted to go, or they got negative feedback, or it was wrong objectively or something. But it doesn't mean it was a bad choice. It could have still been a good choice
Mhm.
from the perspective of the agent.
Yeah, okay, that does make sense. Yeah.
It gets really, this is it. So I find metacognition really interesting, especially when you get to this kind of point where you're trying to map it to higher level or higher cognition or real life. But then it starts to get really complicated, much more
Yeah.
complicated than when you're in the lab just working with dots going left or right.
Mm. I mean, there are just so many layers to it.
Metacognition means that in that context, it becomes much harder to pin down.
Mm. Yeah, I guess that's why the definitions are so important and figuring what variables exactly you're trying to measure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one way of doing that is to just be really precise about confidence and what. So if it's confidence in my ability to predict the world, so um, for example, I'm going to pass my driving test. Um, then and then then your metacognitive abilities in that respect will be very different to um, your confidence that what's a good version for the internal. Your confidence that
Like your driving is good?
driver. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Your driving
Mm.
is good. Yeah,
Okay, so these are two different things, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Mm.
they can dissociate.
What do we know about the relationship between improvements to metacognition and improvements to the overall performance itself?
They're really highly correlated. So in general, pretty much always, the better you are at the task, the better your metacognition, which kind of makes sense because your
Mm.
metacognition is about something, and in general, we're able to evaluate things pretty well.
Mm.
So they go up a lot. Some of the measures, say like this meta-D measure, they try and remove that as best as possible because they want to capture the metacognitive performance, not the decision performance. And that does work. So you can do that mathematically, but there's still this underlying strong relationship that they go up
Are,
together.
are
In
there out are there outliers for this? So I can imagine a scenario where maybe you are good at a certain task, but you're very bad at gauging that you're good at the task. You know how some people are like falsely humble at how good they are at something, and
Yeah.
like I try to believe that they're being humble, but maybe they just don't know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can absolutely dissociate. Yeah. And there are lots of cases of that in individuals. You can also design tasks so that for most people they'll dissociate. So one of the classic examples is uh, kind of making extremely having very, very faint stimuli that people can barely see. They
Hmm.
say, "No, I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything." Um, and you ask them to give confidence. They say, "I don't know." Zero confidence, zero confidence over and over again because they think they can't see it. And they're performing above chance. They can see it,
Hmm.
just don't know.
Hmm.
So that would be the kind of the classic example of these things dissociating. But if
Hmm.
you make the person better, then their metacognition will improve.
Make the person better than their
Yeah, you make
method.
the task easy.
Right. Okay.
If the task is easier, metacognition goes up.
Hmm.
They can still be kind of dissociated, but it'll go up.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. Um. Yeah. So the thing I was trying to get at with all this is the idea that bias kind of it's inescapable in some sense, right? It affects the same brain that does both the cognition and metacognition, but somehow we're able to have this double layer, um, and kind of observe the cognition from an outside perspective, right? And I know the mechanism is a bit um, difficult to pin down with all this, yeah. And so, which is why I asked the question about how correlated they are exactly. Because it seems to me like if they do correlate highly, then they would also probably be affected by the same cognitive bias. Um, yeah. And then it raises questions within me like how can you be aware of a bias and still be biased, you know? Um,
I had
yeah.
a PhD student who did a project on exactly this. So she's training to be a medical doctor now, but she did a really cool project. So she was interested in this awareness of bias thing. Ended up doing something related to that, peripheral to that. So the question was, if you tell people what their biases are, can they stop it? Can
Yeah.
and the answer was yes, and it's really straightforward. They can do it. They don't get any worse at the task. They don't start doing ridiculous things like becoming biased in the other direction. It's a kind of equivalent to asking people to concentrate harder, but it's distinct from asking them to concentrate harder.
Hmm.
They're doing something different to if they just tried harder. But yeah, but it seems people can, at least in perception, when they don't care, they're not invested. So it's not going to be the same as stereotypes or anything like that. But when they're not invested in the choice, people are able to kind of shift their decision making in this way. So this is a metacognitive thing. It's not the same as metacognitive confidence. This is kind of metacognitive control,
Right. Okay.
changing the way in which you're making a decision or the strategy.
Hmm.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
can do it well, which is
Yeah.
neat.
Now that you say it, it seems so obvious and so simple.
Mm.
But yeah.
I didn't take it for granted it would come out that way.
Hmm.
I thought that people would absolutely be able to do it, and they would do it in a kind of heuristic way. So you tell people to stop being biased, and then they just go all the way and become biased for something else instead. That's what I
Right.
thought happened. But no, they could. I was wrong. They can do it.
Cool. Okay. So I apologize for going to this next bit because it's already so difficult. But I wanted to ask you about the third order of metacognition.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just how do you conceptualize such a thing as metacognition? Yeah.
So basically, so the background to this is kind of related to the questions you've been asking. So I've been trying to think about how you could study metacognition for more complicated things than gratings and moving dots, because I think that's the general idea. You want to understand this really important feature of human life, that we can reflect on stuff. So I was thinking, well, usually, why is it a good thing to have reliable confidence? So what I can do is I can do things like learn about how useful my confidence is as an indicator of whether I'm going to get what I want. And then hopefully I can just ignore it when my confidence is useless.
Yeah.
For example, I always think my lecture has gone catastrophically. And it's kind of irrespective of the quality. I mean, sometimes it's catastrophic and sometimes it's fine. But my confidence is completely uninformative. It's useless. And so over time, I can learn that it's useless and not base decisions on my confidence because it's uninformative. So this is what I call metacognition. So learning how reliable your metacognition is, because if it's unreliable, you should ignore it. So I did an experiment with this to see whether people can do this above chance. Can they evaluate how informative their confidence ratings are above chance? And they can, but it looks like they're doing it in a completely reasonable way that's not mysterious at all, using a heuristic. So when the confidence is really extreme, they say it's reliable. When it's intermediate, they say it's unreliable. And that makes sense. That's a really useful way to be able to do this without having some extraordinarily complex metacognitive system. You just say, if I'm really, really, really confident in my choice, then that confidence must be reliable. If I'm 100% sure that I have no clue what's going on, that must be reliable. That must be high confidence. And everything in the middle is, I don't know.
Is that a good heuristic though? I mean, maybe just playing devil's advocate. If you're really, really confident in something, I think there's room to say that maybe you're a bit in over your head regarding the decision, you know?
So yes, this is in the context of a simple visual experiment.
Mm,
So I agree with you. Once you start trying to apply this stuff to kind of daily life decisions, it breaks down. So if I'm 100% confident that I don't know, I should take this particular job over that one or something, it's a little bit overconfident, and I can think of plenty of circumstances where it would be appropriate to have a little bit more hesitancy
mm,
because
okay.
the decision is hard. In the context of perception, when you see something, you just see it. You're 100% sure. And so there, I think it's a useful heuristic.
Let me backtrack a bit. How do you know it's a heuristic?
How do I know it's heuristic? Because it's a like a rule to use, a shortcut. So it doesn't involve actually estimating the reliability of confidence, or estimating or computing, computing how
I see.
likely you are to get to a certain place. It's just a slapdash rule. If confidence is 1 or 4, then high. If confidence is 2 or 3, then low. So
So
in that sense, I call it a heuristic.
in the study, that means when did you collect qualitative data for this? Is that how you knew?
It was quantitative data, so it was just confidence ratings from 1 to 4. So I framed it as, so the participants doing an exam, and first they do the orange exam, and they have to do, what was it? It was a numerosity test. So are there more dots, lines on the left or on the right? And they give themselves a grade, which is like confidence, A, B, C, D. Then they do it again. Then they do the blue exam. Are there more lines on the left or on the right? Confidence, A, B, C, D. And then there are, so that until this point, it's just a completely normal metacognition experiment. Then they're asked to say in which exam was their confidence kind of going to predict their grade better. And that's the meta-meta bit, because at that point, they're saying, in which trial did I have better metacognition? Again, I can't remember your original question.
Yeah, my question was just about how you knew it was a heuristic, because yeah, I mean, presumably you had to discover that the reason why they gave a higher metacognitive judgment was simply because of their high confidence, right?
High or low, yeah.
High or low confidence, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, if I remember correctly, it was that when you removed those extreme confidence trials, people couldn't do it anymore. So
Yeah.
the effect is being driven by people being able to use these confident confidences, which is
Okay.
the lowest and the highest.
So is it fair to say then that if the other hypothesis were true, the hypothesis that they were properly reflecting over how well-founded their confidence is,
Mhm.
then they should be able to um, do it even for the lower confidence or the mid-range confidences.
I think so. I mean, I didn't originally set out to ask that. So the original question was just, all else being equal, can people answer this in which one is your confidence better? Can they answer that question above chance?
Mm.
And the answer was kind of
Yeah, yeah.
kind of,
Mm.
kind of a bit. And then afterwards, the question became, well, under what conditions can they do it? So how are they doing it? Are they really doing meta-metacognition, which is so hard to understand to try and imagine what that would feel like?
Mm.
Kind of reflecting on a reflection on a decision, or are they doing something that's much more straightforward? And
Mm.
it looked like they were doing something more straightforward, which is a good thing. I think if you can try and explain something which sounds really sophisticated in a straightforward way. So how is it that we do this enormously sophisticated thing? Oh, we use this easy trick. I think that's useful, because it's easier, because then you can get closer to an explanation for how this behavioural phenomenon is coming about.
Yeah, I guess it's to be expected that it wouldn't be such a sophisticated thing, mainly because if you take a look at maybe the disparity in people's confidence, like whether it's well founded or not, it doesn't tend to be so reliable. I guess what I'm trying to say is that most of the time people are overconfident or underconfident, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it makes sense that it wouldn't be a properly calculated thing.
No.
Yeah.
And it's really effortful. Have you ever participated in one of these studies?
Not for metacognition, no.
So I often have to impose a time limit on the trial because if I just ask people how confident are you, some people really agonize over this question for like
Mm.
seconds. And if they're doing that 5 seconds, 6 seconds, but if they're going to have to do 1,000 trials, they have to get
It'll take
moving.
forever.
Poor participant is going to be there for hours, and so I have to impose a time limit, and then people end up just going with their gut feeling, which is kind of what you measure, but the process of trying to unpack, I don't know, am I really sure? Did I do it right? Was I concentrating? Was it hard? Was it harder than last time? This is cognitively effortful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the more things you take into account, the
Yeah.
more effort you have to put in. And then, it gets to the question of how many times are you reflecting on your own reflection? Like, right, if you give them like an hour to think about this, they're probably going to go through like 3 or 4 levels of I don't know how many metacognitions, and then the confounds start coming in, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Yeah. So I do empathize with how
Mm.
difficult it is. Yeah.
But it's just to say that I think we're like as people are good at knowing when to apply a lot of effort to something because it's important, and
mm,
when we can default to heuristics
mm,
because we can't agonize over every single decision that's made all the time. It's just impossible.
of
Um,
course.
yeah.
Where do you hope to go with this metacognition research? Like, what do you think the next steps would be?
So I'm not going to follow up with the meta-metacognition,
Hmm.
um, but the general case of wanting to see whether we can take what's learned from perceptual metacognition and apply it to more kind of naturalistic real life tasks. So I'm starting to work on metacognition for social interactions. So I've got
Hmm.
a PhD student at UA who's going to do some work on this. She's great. And so the question here is, so when people are interacting, which is an extremely important part of human life, for example, I need to infer whether I'm making sense based, i.e., whether I think you follow what I'm saying. Am I expressing myself properly? Is the other person interested or bored? Or these kind of things. And I think for many people, or at least some people, think that they can do this fairly well, which makes sense because we're very social as a species. And so the first question is, how good are people at doing this? So how good are people at actually inferring the mental states of others
Hmm.
that people they don't know, not people they're experts in, like their family. And how do people do it? So there are some models, really elegant, very complicated models of how we might mentalize, so think about others. But maybe maybe there are also some easier strategies we can use to
Hmm.
like assume that everyone's like us and then just do metacognition, which is much
Right. Yeah. I guess it's situational as well, right? Where we would use the simpler and more complex things. Yeah. I mean that is, when I was asking you about the content of metacognition, yeah, the social cognition was one of those things that I wanted to highlight, but I held myself back. So I knew it was another can of worms. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you bring it up. I think it's really interesting, as well. The final question I have for you is, what's one thing we can look out for from you? What's exciting in the future for you?
um, I'm really excited about the metacognition for social interaction stuff. I think it's going to be really fun. So looking at so the thing I just mentioned, how how is it that we judge our ability to understand others? It's going to start at the beginning and then hopefully build up.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'll end it here. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was very insightful. Thank you.
To see you. Thank you.